The California sun beat down on the dusty highway as Sylvester Stallone guided his vintage Mustang along the winding road. He'd been filming for 16 hours straight, and his muscles ached from the countless takes of a particularly demanding fight scene. All he wanted now was a quiet place to grab a bite and clear his head before heading back to his hotel. The small roadside diner appeared like an oasis on the horizon. Pete's Pit Stop read the flickering neon sign, half the letters, burned out from years of desert heat. It wasn't fancy, but that was exactly what Stallone wanted. Somewhere he could blend in without the usual fanfare that followed him everywhere in Hollywood. He pulled into the gravel parking lot, noticing a row of gleaming motorcycles lined up near the entrance. Harley-Davidsons, chrome polished to mirror-like perfection, their leather saddlebags adorned with patches and symbols he didn't recognize. Stallone sighed. So much for a quiet meal. Still, he was too hungry to keep driving, and the next town was at least 30 miles away. Pulling his worn baseball cap lower over his eyes, he grabbed his dog-eared script from the passenger seat and headed inside. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, but nobody looked up. The diner was dimly lit and smelled of coffee and fried food. A waitress with tired eyes and a faded blue uniform was refilling coffee cups at the counter. In the far corner, a group of 5 men in leather vests huddled around a table, their laughter loud and rough. "Sit anywhere you like, honey," the waitress called out without looking up. Stallone chose a booth as far from the bikers as possible and slid into the cracked vinyl seat. He set his script on the table and removed his sunglasses, rubbing his eyes. The drive had been longer than expected, and the bright afternoon sun had given him a headache. "What can I get you?" The waitress appeared beside him, notepad in hand. Her name tag read Flo, and deep lines around her eyes hinted at a life that hadn't been easy. "Just coffee and whatever sandwich special you've got today," Stallone replied, keeping his voice low and casual. Flo squinted at him for a moment. "You look familiar. Anybody ever tell you that?" Stallone gave a small smile. "I get that sometimes." "Huh," she said, shrugging. "Coffee'll be right up." As Flo walked away, Stallone pulled out his script and a red pen. The director had suggested some changes to tomorrow's scenes, and he wanted to review them before heading back. He became absorbed in his work, making notes in the margins and crossing out lines that didn't feel right for his character. Meanwhile, the noise from the bikers' table grew louder. Beer bottles clinked, and occasional bursts of laughter punctuated their conversation. Stallone tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the words in front of him. "I'm telling you, we should have taken the canyon route," one of the bikers said, his voice carrying across the diner. "Would have saved us 2 hours. "And blown out your tires on those rocks," another replied. "Last time we went that way, Tom ended up stranded for a whole day waiting for a tow." Stallone smiled to himself. Their conversation reminded him of the arguments he'd had with friends during road trips in his younger days, before fame changed everything. There was something refreshingly normal about it. Flo returned with his coffee and sandwich. "Here you go, hun. Let me know if you need anything else." "Thanks," Stallone said, taking a grateful sip of the hot coffee. It was strong and bitter, exactly what he needed. As he ate, he continued making notes on his script, occasionally glancing up when the bikers' laughter grew particularly loud. They seemed to be celebrating something, clapping one of their members on the back and ordering another round of beers. The door to the diner opened again, and 2 more bikers entered, their boots heavy on the worn linoleum floor. They joined, their friends adding to the already boisterous atmosphere. Stallone noted that all of them wore similar leather vests with a design on the back, a flaming skull with the words, "Steel Horses," curved above it. He had just taken another bite of his sandwich when he felt eyes on him. Looking up, he noticed one of the newer arrivals staring in his direction, nudging his companion and whispering something. Stallone returned to his script, hoping they would lose interest. He'd dealt with recognition in public before. Sometimes it led to friendly interactions, other times to uncomfortable situations where people forgot he was just a person trying to live his life. "No way," he heard one of them say, not bothering to lower his voice. That ain't him. What would he be doing in a dump like this? I'm telling you, it's him, the other insisted. That's Rocky himself. Stallone kept his eyes on his script, pretending not to hear. Years in the public eye had taught him that sometimes the best response was no response at all. He took another sip of coffee and turned a page, though he was no longer reading the words. The conversation at the bikers' table had shifted now, all of them glancing his way between comments. Their leader, a tall man with a thick beard and tattooed arms, seemed particularly interested, studying Stallone with narrowed eyes. Only one way to find out, Beard said finally, pushing back his chair with a scrape that echoed through the diner. Stallone felt rather than saw the man approach, his heavy footsteps vibrating through the floor. He continued reading, hoping the encounter would be brief and friendly. He'd signed autographs in stranger places. "Excuse me," the biker said, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. "My buddies and I were wondering if you're who we think you are." Stallone looked up, offering a polite smile. "Depends on who you think I am." The biker crossed his arms, a grin spreading across his face. "Come on, man. You're him, aren't you?" Stallone, Rocky, Rambo. By now the entire diner had gone quiet. Flo stood behind the counter, coffee pot frozen mid-pour as she watched the exchange. Even the cook had emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a stained apron. "Yeah, that's me," Stallone admitted with a small nod. There was no point denying it now. The biker's grin widened. "See? Told you guys," he called back to his friends. "It's really him." He turned back to Stallone, extending a hand. "Name's Duke. Big fan. Man, really big fan." Stallone shook his hand, relieved that the encounter seemed friendly. "Nice to meet you, Duke. Thanks for watching the films." "Watching? Man, I've seen Rocky at least 50 times. Got me through some tough spots, you know." Duke's expression was surprisingly earnest beneath his rough exterior. "That means a lot to hear," Stallone said, and he meant it. No matter how many awards or box office records his films broke, knowing they connected with people on a personal level was always the most rewarding part. "Hey, would you mind meeting the rest of the crew? They're not gonna believe this." Stallone glanced at his watch. He still had a long drive back, and he really needed to finish reviewing his script. But the hopeful look on Duke's face made it hard to refuse. "Sure, just for a minute." Duke led him to the bikers' table, where the others had risen to their feet, looking both intimidating and strangely nervous. "Guys, this is Sylvester Stallone. Stallone, these are the Steel Horses." "Nice to meet you all," Stallone said, shaking hands around the table as Duke introduced each member. There was Buzz, a wiry man with a handlebar mustache. Bear, who lived up to his name in size. Wolf, who said nothing but nodded respectfully. Ray, whose arms were covered in colorful tattoos. And finally Pete, the youngest of the group, with an eager smile. "Never thought we'd run into a legend like you out here in the middle of nowhere," Ray said, still looking somewhat starstruck. "Sometimes. Nowhere is exactly where I need to be," Stallone replied with a smile. "Been filming nearby and just needed a break from it all." "New movie?" Pete asked eagerly. "Another action one?" Stallone nodded. "Something like that. Can't say too much about it yet." "Whatever it is, we'll be first in line," Duke assured him. "Hey, would you mind if we got a picture? Nobody's gonna believe we met you otherwise." "Sure, no problem." Stallone agreed, though he was beginning to feel the weight of exhaustion settling on his shoulders. The day had been long and he still had work to do. As they gathered around him for the photo, Duke pulling out his phone, Stallone noticed the cook approaching their table, looking nervous. "Mr. Stallone?" the cook said hesitantly. "I hate to bother you, but my son is your biggest fan. We've watched all your movies together since he was just a kid. Would you mind signing something for him? It would mean the world to us both." Before Stallone could answer, the bell above the door jingled again and 3 more bikers entered the diner. Unlike the Steel Horses, these men had a different energy about them, harder, colder. Their leather vests bore a different insignia, a red devil's head with the words "Road Demons" emblazoned above it. The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly. Duke and his friends straightened up, their friendly expressions hardening into wary glares. Flo quickly retreated behind the counter, and the cook took a step back. "Well, well," said the leader of the newcomers, a heavily muscled man with a shaved head and a scar running down one cheek. "Look what we have here. The steel horses playing nice with celebrities." Stallone sensed the tension immediately. These groups clearly had history, and he had somehow landed in the middle of it. He glanced toward his booth, wondering if he could politely excuse himself and return to his coffee and script. But the moment for a graceful exit had already passed. The scarred man was looking directly at him now, sizing him up with cold eyes. "You know," the man said, taking a step closer. "My cousin works in Hollywood. Says all those tough guy actors are just pretending, that when the cameras stop rolling, they're soft as butter." He smirked, looking Stallone up and down. "What do you think about that, movie star?" Duke moved slightly, positioning himself between Stallone and the newcomer. "Back off, Vic. He's just trying to have a meal in peace." "Didn't ask you, did I?" Vic replied, his eyes never leaving Stallone's face. "I'm curious what Rocky himself has to say." The air in the diner grew thick with tension. Flo had her hand on the phone behind the counter, clearly ready to call for help if needed. The other diners had fallen completely silent, watching the confrontation unfold. Stallone remained calm, years of dealing with difficult personalities on set helping him keep his composure. But as he looked into Vic's challenging eyes, he realized this encounter might not end as peacefully as he'd hoped. Stallone took a slow breath, considering his options. In his decades in Hollywood, he'd learned that ego-driven confrontations rarely ended well. The smart move would be to defuse the situation, pay his bill, and leave. But something in Vic's eyes told him that walking away might not be so simple. "Look," Stallone said evenly, "I'm just having a coffee and heading out. I don't want any trouble." Vic laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet diner. "Hear that, boys? The tough guy doesn't want trouble." He turned to his companions, two burly men who snickered on cue. "Guess all that fighting stuff is just for the cameras after all." Duke stepped forward, his jaw tight. "He said he doesn't want trouble, neither do we. So why don't you road demons find somewhere else to hang out?" "Free country, last I checked," Vic replied, sliding into an empty booth across from Stallone's. His friends took the table next to it, effectively blocking the path to the door. "Besides, how often do you get to meet a celebrity? I'm a fan myself." The way he said fan made it clear he was anything but. Stallone glanced at Duke and the other steel horses, seeing the tension in their stances. This could escalate quickly. The last thing he wanted was to be responsible for a brawl in this quiet diner. "Look," Stallone said, addressing Vic directly. "I appreciate meeting fans, but I've had a long day filming. I was just about to pay my bill and head out." "Filming, huh?" Vic leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "What's this one about? Another story where the little guy miraculously beats everyone through sheer willpower?" His tone was mocking. "Real life doesn't work that way. In real life, the strong win, and the weak get stepped on." Flo approached cautiously, coffee pot in hand like a shield. "Can I get you boys anything?" she asked, her voice tight. "Coffee all around," Vic replied without looking at her. "And whatever pie you got." Stallone could see the fear in Flo's eyes as she hurried back to the counter. The cook had disappeared, into the kitchen, probably hoping the situation would resolve itself without violence. "Actually," Stallone said, deciding to try a different approach, "many of my films are based on real stories. People who overcame incredible odds, not through magic but through dedication and heart." "Heart," Vic repeated, smirking. "Tell that to someone who's been knocked down and couldn't get back up." Something in his tone made Stallone look closer. Beneath the bravado and aggression, he sensed an old pain. He'd met enough people over the years to recognize when someone was carrying a burden. "I've been knocked down plenty," Stallone said quietly, on screen and off. "Getting up isn't about being stronger than the other guy. It's about being stronger than you were a moment ago." For a brief second, something flickered in Vic's eyes. Recognition, maybe even respect. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the same hard stare. "Pretty words," Vic said, "but that's all they are, words." Flo returned with the coffee, setting the cups down with shaking hands. "Pie's coming right up," she said, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Actually," Duke interjected. We were just leaving. He looked at Stallone. Mr. Stallone has to get back to work and we've taken up enough of his time. Vic's eyes narrowed. Don't remember asking for your input, Duke. And I don't remember asking for yours when I was talking to Mr. Stallone. Duke shot back. The tension in the diner ratcheted up another notch. Stallone could see the other diners watching nervously, some gathering their belongings ready to make a quick exit if things turned ugly. Vic rose slowly from his seat, standing eye to eye with Duke. Though they were similar in height, Vic had at least 30 pounds of muscle on the steel horse leader. You always did have a big mouth, Vic growled. And you always did have a small brain, Duke replied, not backing down. Stallone stood up, placing a hand on Duke's shoulder. I appreciate you guys looking out for me, but this isn't your fight. With all due respect, Mr. Stallone, Bear said, stepping forward. When someone messes with our friends, it becomes our fight. Stallone was touched by the sentiment, especially coming from men he'd met less than 20 minutes ago. But he also knew that if punches started flying, someone was bound to get hurt. Friends? Vic laughed. You've known him for what, half an hour? And you're ready to throw down for him? That's rich, even for you steel horses. One of Vic's companions, a man with a snake tattoo coiling up his neck, moved closer. Way I see it, we got 3 of us and, he counted mockingly. 6 of you, including the movie star. Not great odds for you. I like those odds just fine. Wolf spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly soft for such an imposing man. Stallone saw the situation spiraling and decided to take control. He stepped between the two groups, facing Vic. Nobody needs to fight today. You've got a problem with me, fine, but leave these guys out of it. Vic's eyes gleamed with something that might have been respect, or might have been anticipation of a fight. Look at that. The movie star's got some real guts, after all. He crossed his arms. All right, Stallone. Just you and me then. Outside. The diner fell completely silent. Flo had stopped pretending to wipe down the counter and was staring openly now. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to have paused in anticipation. Stallone looked at Vic, seeing the challenge in his eyes. Walking away wasn't an option anymore, not without losing face in front of everyone and possibly setting up Duke and his friends for future trouble with the road demons. But fighting in a parking lot like some barroom brawler wasn't his style either. I've got a better idea, Stallone said calmly. Sit down. Have your coffee. Let me tell you a story about the real fights I've had, not the ones on camera. Vic blinked, clearly thrown by this unexpected response. He'd been ready for either a confrontation or a cowardly retreat, not an invitation to conversation. What kind of game are you playing? He asked suspiciously. No game, Stallone replied. Just offering something different than what you're expecting. The diner remained frozen, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Vic glanced at his companions, who looked equally confused by this turn of events. After what felt like an eternity, Vic gave a short laugh. All right, movie star, I'll bite, but this better be good. He slid back into the booth, gesturing for Stallone to sit across from him. Stallone nodded to Duke and the others, silently telling them it was okay. They reluctantly returned to their table, though they kept watching Vic and his friends carefully. As Stallone sat down, Flo approached, with a fresh pot of coffee and a hesitant smile. On the house, she said, refilling his cup, for handling that nicely. Thanks, Flo, Stallone replied with a genuine smile. Once she left, Vic leaned forward. So what's this story you're so eager to tell? Some Hollywood tale about how you did your own stunts? No, Stallone said, taking a sip of his coffee. It's about the time I was homeless in New York, sleeping in a bus station in the middle of winter because I had nowhere else to go. This clearly wasn't what Vic had expected. His eyebrows rose slightly. I was broke, Stallone continued. So broke I had to sell my dog because I couldn't afford to feed him. The memory still hurt, even after all these years. I was trying to make it as an actor, but nobody would give me a chance. I went to hundreds of auditions and got turned down every time. So what? Vic said, but there was less hostility in his voice now. Lots of people have it rough. Exactly, Stallone nodded. I'm not special, but I was stubborn. too stubborn to quit even when quitting made the most sense. He paused, remembering those dark days. I wrote the script for Rocky during that time. Wrote it in 3 days straight because I was afraid if I stopped, I'd never finish. The snake-tattooed man snorted. What, you expect us to feel sorry for you because you were poor before you got rich and famous? No, Stallone replied calmly. I expect nothing. I'm just telling you that the stories in my movies about getting knocked down and getting back up, they're not just movie magic. They come from something real. Vic studied him for a long moment. So you wrote Rocky. Big deal. Doesn't mean you know anything about real fighting. Stallone smiled slightly. You'd be surprised. What's that supposed to mean? Vic challenged. It means that preparing for roles taught me more than just how to look good on camera. Stallone took another sip of his coffee. For Rocky, I trained with real boxers. For Rambo, I worked with military advisors. I've studied various martial arts for over 40 years. Studying ain't the same as doing, Snake Tattoo interjected. You're right, Stallone agreed. That's why I've also competed. Not professionally, but in controlled environments with skilled opponents. Vic leaned back, a new expression on his face, curiosity mixed with lingering skepticism. You expect us to believe that? I don't expect anything, Stallone repeated. But it's the truth. From across the diner, Duke called out, It's true. I read an interview where he talked about having a black belt in karate. Been training since the 70s. Vic shot Duke an irritated look. Nobody asked you. Actually, Stallone said, he's right, though I don't like to talk about it much. Belts and ranks don't mean much compared to actual experience. A strange silence fell over the table. Vic was clearly reassessing the man sitting across from him. The aggressive certainty from earlier had given way to something more complex. So what's your point with all this? Vic finally asked. That I shouldn't judge a book by its cover? Stallone shrugged. Something like that. Or maybe just that we all have more in common than we think. You, me, Duke, and his friends over there. We've all faced our own battles. Vic's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about my battles. No, Stallone agreed. I don't, but I know they've shaped who you are just like mine shaped me. For a long moment, Vic said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A genuine sound without the earlier mockery. You're not what I expected, Stallone. I get that a lot, Stallone replied with a small smile. The atmosphere in the diner had shifted, the earlier tension giving way to something less volatile. Flo returned with slices of apple pie for Vic and his friends, looking considerably more relaxed. Best pie in 3 counties, she said, setting the plates down. Though I might be a bit biased. As they ate, the conversation continued, gradually becoming less confrontational. Vic revealed that he'd been a boxer in his youth, with dreams of turning pro until an injury ended his career. His cousin really did work in Hollywood, though as a stagehand rather than whatever he'd implied earlier. So that's why you've got a chip on your shoulder about actors, Stallone observed. Vic shrugged, fork halfway to his mouth. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just naturally charming. This drew a laugh from everyone at the table, including Vic himself. As they finished their pie, the door to the diner opened again. Everyone turned, half expecting more trouble, but it was just a family stopping for a late lunch. The father did a double take when he saw Stallone, but quickly ushered his wide-eyed children to a table on the other side of the restaurant. Looks like your cover's blown, Vic said, nodding toward the family. Stallone smiled ruefully. It was bound to happen, eventually. He glanced at his watch, surprised to see how much time had passed. I should really get going. Got an early call time tomorrow. Vic nodded, his expression now thoughtful rather than aggressive. Yeah, sure. He hesitated, then extended his hand across the table. No hard feelings? Stallone shook it firmly. None, at all. As he stood to leave, Duke approached from the other table. Everything okay here? We're good, Stallone assured him. Just having a conversation. Duke looked at Vic, years of rivalry evident in his gaze. You giving him trouble? Vic raised his hands in mock surrender. Just talking, like the man said. Even I know better than to pick a fight with someone who could probably put me through that wall. Duke seemed surprised by this response, looking between Vic and Stallone with raised eyebrows. "Well," Stallone said, reaching for his wallet, "let me settle up and I'll get out of your hair." "Already taken care of," Flo called from behind the counter. "Least I could do after all the entertainment." Stallone smiled gratefully. "Thanks, Flo. The pie was excellent." As he collected his script from his original table, he could feel the eyes of everyone in the diner on him. What had started as a quest for a quiet meal had turned into something quite different. Yet somehow he didn't mind. There was something refreshingly honest about the encounter, stripped of the usual Hollywood pretense. He was almost to the door when Vic called after him. "Hey, Stallone, one question before you go." Stallone turned, eyebrows raised. "Yeah?" A challenging grin spread across Vic's face. "In a real fight, no cameras, no script, who wins, you or me?" The diner fell silent. Again, everyone waiting for his answer. Stallone looked at Vic thoughtfully, then smiled. "Only one way to find out for sure. But personally," he let the pause stretch out, building the tension, "I'd put my money on the guy who's smart enough not to find out." And with that, he pushed open the door and stepped out into the bright California sunshine, leaving a diner full of surprised faces behind him. Stallone breathed in the warm desert air as he walked toward his car, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders. The encounter inside had taken an unexpected turn, but he was glad it had ended, peacefully. As he reached for his car door, he heard the diner's bell jingle behind him. Turning, he saw Duke and the other steel horses stepping outside. "That was something else," Duke said, approaching with an impressed look on his face. "Never seen anyone talk Vic down like that. Man's got a temper that could melt steel." Stallone shrugged. "Sometimes people just need to be heard." Bear, the largest of the group, nodded thoughtfully. "You saw something in him the rest of us missed. Been feuding with those road demons for years, never thought about what makes them tick." "Everyone has a story," Stallone replied. "Even the people who make life difficult." He glanced at his watch again. "I really should get going, though. Long drive ahead." "Where are you headed?" Duke asked. "Back to Los Angeles. Shooting resumes at dawn tomorrow." Pete, the youngest biker, looked at the setting sun and frowned. "That's a 3-hour drive at least. And that stretch of highway gets tricky after dark. Lots of blind curves, no streetlights." "I've done worse," Stallone assured him, though the thought of the winding desert roads at night wasn't particularly appealing after such a long day. Duke exchanged glances with his friends, then turned back to Stallone. "Listen, we're headed toward LA ourselves. Why don't we ride together? Safety in numbers, plus we know all the best routes." Stallone hesitated. He'd planned to use the drive to run through his lines for tomorrow, maybe call his agent about some pending projects. But there was something appealing about the offer, a glimpse into a world far removed from Hollywood's carefully constructed reality. "I appreciate it, but I wouldn't want to slow you guys down," he said. "Cars can't keep up with bikes on those roads." "We'll match your pace," Wolf said quietly. It was only the second time Stallone had heard him speak. "No rush." Before Stallone could respond, the diner door opened again. This time it was Vic and his two companions, pausing briefly when they saw the group by Stallone's car. An awkward silence fell over the parking lot. Years of rivalry didn't disappear over a single conversation, no matter how civil it had been. Stallone could see Duke's shoulders tense, ready for trouble if it came. To everyone's surprise, Vic raised a hand in a casual salute. "Stallone," he called. "Safe travels." His eyes shifted to Duke. "You too, I guess." Duke seemed momentarily lost for words, then nodded stiffly. "Yeah, you too." Vic and his friends walked to their motorcycles parked on the far side of the lot. The tension lingered in the air, but it had transformed into something less volatile, an uneasy truce rather than open hostility. As the road demons kicked their bikes to life and roared away in a cloud of dust, Duke shook his head in disbelief. "That's the closest thing to friendly I've ever seen from Vic." "Miracles never cease," Bear said with a chuckle. Stallone watched the road demons disappear down the highway, pondering how quickly relationships could shift when people dropped their guards even slightly. It reminded him of scenes he'd played over the years, characters finding unexpected common ground with their adversaries. "So," Duke said, bringing him back to the present. "What do you say? Escort to LA?" Stallone made his decision. "All right, but on one condition." "Name it." "We stop for dinner on the way." "My treat?" Stallone grinned. "Somewhere with no rival biker gangs, preferably." The steel horses laughed, the last of the tension dissolving. "Deal," Duke said, extending his hand. As the bikers returned to their motorcycles, Stallone took a moment to text his assistant about his change in plans. He knew the production team would worry if he arrived later than expected. "Just got a personal escort back to LA. We'll be a few hours late. All good." The reply came almost instantly. "Only you could make friends with a biker gang during a coffee break. Drive safe. Car still in one piece?" Stallone smiled as he typed back, "So far. We'll update if that changes." By the time he slid behind the wheel, the steel horses had their engines rumbling, lined up and ready to go. Duke gave him a thumbs up, which Stallone returned before starting his car. The Mustang's engine purred to life, a sound that always satisfied him no matter how many exotic vehicles he'd driven for films. They pulled onto the highway, Stallone's car in the middle with bikers in front and behind like an impromptu parade. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the desert landscape in hues of gold and amber. It was the kind of scene that would cost a fortune to film but was happening naturally around him. One of those perfect moments that reminded him why he loved this part of the country. As they drove, Stallone found himself reflecting on the events at the diner. He'd faced down aggressive fans before, but something about Vic had been different. The man's hostility hadn't come from the usual place of wanting to test a celebrity's toughness or get a rise out of someone famous. It had felt more personal, as if Stallone himself represented something Vic resented. The convoy stopped at a gas station about an hour into the journey. While filling up his tank, Stallone noticed Pete taking photos of the Mustang, admiring its classic lines. "She's a beauty," Pete said when he realized Stallone was watching. 67? 65, Stallone corrected. "Original engine, too." Pete whistled appreciatively. "My dad had one like this when I was a kid. Not nearly as well maintained, though. Spent more time in the garage than on the road." "These old girls need a lot of care," Stallone agreed, patting the car's hood affectionately. "But they reward you for it." "Kind of like relationships," Pete said with unexpected wisdom. Stallone looked at the young man with new interest. "Exactly. Like relationships. You into cars as well as bikes?" "Anything with an engine," Pete admitted with a grin. "But bikes won the battle for my heart. Nothing compares to the freedom." As they continued talking, Duke approached with bottles of water for everyone. "Hydration break," he announced, passing them around. "Desert air'll dry you out before you know it." Stallone accepted the water gratefully. The warm day had left him thirstier than he'd realized. "Thanks. How much farther to our dinner stop?" "About 40 minutes, Duke replied. "There's a roadhouse just off the highway that serves the best steaks in Southern California. No exaggeration." "High praise," Stallone said. "I'm looking forward to it." Once they were back on the road, Stallone found himself enjoying the journey more than expected. There was something liberating about the impromptu adventure, a departure from his carefully scheduled life of scripts, interviews, and public appearances. Out here, with the desert stretching endlessly on either side and the steel horses escorting him like old friends, he wasn't Sylvester Stallone, the movie star, but just another traveler on the highway. The roadhouse appeared exactly as Duke had described it. A sprawling wooden structure with neon beer signs glowing in the windows, and a gravel parking lot filled with trucks, cars, and motorcycles. Country music drifted out whenever the door opened, along with the mouth-watering smell of grilled meat. "Told you it was popular," Duke said as they searched for parking spots. "Food's worth the wait, though." Inside, the roadhouse was packed with a diverse crowd. Truckers sat at the bar, cowboy-hatted locals occupied the booths, and tourists huddled around tables in the center, all drawn by the restaurant's reputation. The walls were covered with license plates from every state, vintage advertisements and signed photographs of visitors, some famous, most not. The hostess, a woman with bright red hair and a warm smile, greeted Duke by name. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. Haven't seen you boys in a month of Sundays. Been busy, Maggie," Duke replied with a grin. "Got room for 6 more? For you? Always." Her eyes widened as she noticed Stallone. "And you brought company." Stallone offered his hand. "Nice to meet you, Maggie." To her credit, she recovered quickly, from her surprise shaking his hand firmly. "Pleasure's all mine. Any friend of these troublemakers is welcome here." She grabbed a stack of menus. "Follow me, gentlemen. Got a corner booth that should fit all of you." As they weaved through the crowded restaurant, Stallone noticed a few double takes from diners, but most were too focused on their meals to pay much attention. It was refreshing compared to Los Angeles, where he could rarely eat in public without being approached for autographs or photos. The booth Maggie led them to was partially secluded, offering a view of the entire restaurant while providing some privacy. "Best seat in the house," she declared. "Your server will be right with you. Special tonight is the ribeye with roasted garlic butter." After she left, Bear leaned forward eagerly. "The ribeye here will change your life, man. Seriously. Hi." "Praise," Stallone said, scanning the menu. "I'll have to try it." Their server, a young man who introduced himself as Tony, took their drink orders without a hint of recognition. Either he didn't know who Stallone was, or he was professional enough not to show it. Either way, Stallone appreciated the normal treatment. As they waited for their food, the conversation flowed easily. Stallone learned that Duke had been a Marine before founding the Steel Horses with Wolf, his childhood friend. Bear was a mechanic who owned a custom bike shop in Venice Beach. Ray taught high school history during the week and rode on weekends. And Pete, the youngest at 25, was working his way through college, studying film production of all things. "No way," Stallone said when Pete shared this detail. "What area?" "Directing," Pete replied, a hint of shyness creeping into his voice for the first time. "Though I'm realistic about the odds." "The odds are always against you in this business," Stallone agreed. "But that doesn't mean it's impossible." "That's what I keep telling myself," Pete said. "Gotta believe in the dream, right?" "Without the dream, there's nothing to fight for," Stallone replied, quoting one of his own characters without realizing it. The food arrived, enormous plates of perfectly cooked steaks, crispy fries, and fresh vegetables. Bear hadn't exaggerated. The ribeye was exceptional, seasoned simply but cooked to perfection. As they ate, the conversation shifted to motorcycles, with Duke and the others explaining the modifications they'd made to their bikes. Stallone listened, with genuine interest. Though cars had always been his passion, he appreciated the craftsmanship and dedication that went into custom motorcycles. "Ever ridden?" Wolf asked during a lull in the conversation. Stallone nodded. "A few times for films. Had a Harley for a while in the 90s, but eventually sold it. My schedule got too unpredictable to ride regularly." "Shame," Wolf said. "Nothing compares to it." "Maybe I'll get another one someday," Stallone mused. When things slow down, the others exchanged knowing glances. "Things never slow down," Duke said with a smile. "You just have to make time for what matters." It was simple advice, but resonated with Stallone more than Duke could know. Despite his success, or perhaps because of it, finding time for the things that truly mattered had become increasingly difficult over the years. As they finished their meal, Stallone insisted on paying despite the group's protests. "You're saving me from a lonely drive back," he said firmly. "Least I can do." Outside, the night had fully settled in, stars shining brilliantly in the clear desert sky. The temperature had dropped considerably, and Stallone was glad for the leather jacket he'd brought along. "Still about an hour and a half to LA, Duke said as they walked to their vehicles. "We should hit the city by—" He was interrupted by the roar of approaching motorcycles. Multiple bikes pulled into the parking lot, their headlights cutting through the darkness. As they came closer, Stallone recognized the lead rider, Vic from the diner with his road demons right behind him. Duke and the others tensed immediately, moving instinctively closer together. Stallone felt the peaceful evening suddenly hanging in the balance. Had Vic followed them here? Was the truce from earlier already broken? The road demons parked near the entrance, Vic cutting his engine and removing his helmet. His eyes scanned the lot, stopping when he spotted Stallone and the steel horses. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Vic raised his hand in the same casual salute from earlier and nodded once before turning toward the roadhouse entrance. Duke exhaled slowly. Well, guess it really is the best steakhouse around. Small world, Stallone agreed, relieved that the encounter hadn't escalated. As they continued to their vehicles, Stallone couldn't help but feel that something significant had shifted. Not just between these rival groups, but in his own perspective. Sometimes the most meaningful experiences came from the most unexpected places. The night had more surprises in store as they prepared to continue their journey toward Los Angeles. But for now, under the vast desert sky, surrounded by his unlikely new friends, Stallone felt a rare sense of being exactly where he was meant to be. Back on the highway, the night had transformed the landscape. The once golden desert was now a sea of deep blues and purples, with the road cutting through like a black ribbon under the starlight. Stallone followed the red taillights of Duke's motorcycle, the other steel horses flanking him like an honor guard. The dinner had left him in a reflective mood, spending time with the bikers, men who lived so differently from him and the people who usually filled his world, had been surprisingly refreshing. There was an honesty to them, a straightforward quality that Hollywood often lacked. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Production meeting pushed to 9 a.m. Director says take your time getting back. Stallone smiled. A small reprieve, but welcome nonetheless. He texted back a quick thanks and returned his attention to the road. About 30 minutes outside Los Angeles, the traffic began to thicken despite the late hour. The endless sprawl of the city announced itself with a glow on the horizon long before the buildings came into view. Duke signaled and led them off the main highway onto a less traveled route, a local secret that bypassed the worst congestion. The new road wound through hills dotted with expensive homes, their lights twinkling like earthbound stars. It was a scenic approach to the city, one that Stallone hadn't taken in years despite living here for decades. They were making good time when Duke suddenly raised his hand, signaling the group to slow down. Ahead, red and blue lights flashed at the roadside. A police cruiser was parked behind a motorcycle, its rider standing beside an officer. As they drew closer, Stallone recognized the bike. It belonged to one of the road demons, the one with the snake tattoo on his neck. The man looked stressed, gesturing animatedly as the officer wrote something in his notepad. Duke pulled over about 50 yards away, the others following suit. Stallone parked behind them, curious about why they'd stopped. "What's going on?" he asked as he approached the bikers. "Road demon got pulled over," Duke said, his expression unreadable. "Looks like Snake's having a bad night." "Snake?" Stallone asked. "Guy with the neck tattoo," Bear explained. "Don't know his real name. Everyone just calls him Snake." They watched as the officer handed Snake a ticket. The biker's body language was tense, his movements sharp with frustration as he shoved the paper into his jacket. "Should we keep going?" Stallone suggested, not wanting to rubberneck someone else's misfortune. Duke hesitated. "Hold up a minute." As the police cruiser pulled away, Snake kicked his motorcycle's tire in frustration. He tried to start the bike, but the engine only sputtered and died. After several attempts, he slammed his hand on the fuel tank and looked around, seemingly realizing he was stranded. "Something's wrong with his bike," Wolf observed quietly. Duke sighed heavily. "Yeah?" He looked at his fellow steel horses, an unspoken question in his eyes. Bear shook his head. "No way, man. He's a road demon. Let Vic come get him." "Middle of nowhere, late at night," Duke countered. "Could be waiting hours." Stallone watched this exchange with interest. Hours earlier, these men had been ready to fight the road demons. Now Duke was considering helping one of them. The complexity of their rivalry, not simple hatred, but something with its own unwritten rules, fascinated him. "It's your call," Ray said to Duke. But whatever we do together. Duke looked at Stallone. What do you think? Stallone was surprised to be consulted. Me? I'm just along for the ride. Yeah, but you're the one who got Vic to back down earlier, Duke said. Figured you might have some perspective. Stallone considered the situation. In his films, moments like these often defined a character's true nature. The easy choice was to drive past, leaving Snake to his problems. The harder choice? If it were one of you stranded out here, Stallone asked, what would you want to happen? The bikers exchanged glances. Damn it, Bear muttered. Fine, let's go see what's wrong. Duke nodded and started his bike, leading the group toward Snake. The road demon looked up at their approach, his expression shifting from hope to wariness when he recognized them. Well, Snake said as they parked nearby. The steel horses coming to gloat? Looks like you're having some trouble, Duke replied, ignoring the hostility. Nothing I can't handle, Snake insisted, though it was clearly untrue. Bear dismounted his bike and approached. What's it doing or not doing? Snake hesitated, pride battling with practicality. Finally, practicality won. Starts, then dies, won't stay running. Bear nodded. Mind if I take a look? Another hesitation. Then Snake stepped aside. Knock yourself out. As Bear began examining the motorcycle, Stallone joined Duke at the roadside. That was a good call, he said quietly. Maybe, Duke replied. Or maybe I'm getting soft in my old age. Stallone laughed. There are worse things to be. Snake noticed Stallone for the first time. You're still with these guys? Thought they were just giving you an escort from the diner. Plans changed, Stallone said simply. Snake looked like he wanted to say something else, but Bear interrupted from his position crouched beside the motorcycle. Fuel filters clogged, he announced. Easy fix if you've got a spare. If not, we'd need to clean this. One out, Snake grimaced. Don't have a spare. I might, Ray said, surprising everyone. He went to his bike and dug through one of the saddlebags. Yep, should fit your model. Why do you carry road demon parts? Pete asked, bewildered. Ray shrugged. Same manufacturer, parts are interchangeable. He handed the filter to Bear, who quickly began working on the repair. Snake watched with a mixture of suspicion and relief. Why are you helping me? He finally asked. Good question, Duke replied. Maybe we're just tired of the same old story. Snake nodded slowly, understanding more than was said. As Bear finished the repair, Stallone found himself admiring these men more and more. Their world operated on principles outsiders might not understand, but there was an integrity to it. A code that valued actions over words. Try it now, Bear said, stepping back from the motorcycle. Snake swung his leg over the seat and hit the starter. The engine roared to life, running smoothly. Relief washed over his face. Thanks, he said, the words seemingly difficult for him. I owe you one. Just pass it on sometime, Bear replied. Snake nodded, then looked at Stallone. You're all right, movie star. And your friends too, I guess. With that backhanded compliment, he revved his engine and took off down the highway. Well, that was unexpected, Pete said as they watched him disappear into the night. The whole day's been unexpected, Duke replied. But in a good way. He turned to Stallone. Ready to finish this journey? They continued toward Los Angeles, the city growing larger with each mile. Stallone felt a strange reluctance as they approached. Once they reached the city limits, this unusual day would end, and he'd return to his regular life of scripts, cameras, and carefully controlled environments. The thought had barely formed when flashing lights appeared behind them. Another police cruiser, this time clearly signaling for them to pull over. Duke led the group to the shoulder, everyone stopping in, an orderly line. The officer approached cautiously, hand resting near his holster as he surveyed the collection of bikers and Stallone's Mustang. Evening, gentlemen, the officer said, shining his flashlight from face to face. Mind telling me where you're headed? Los Angeles, Duke replied calmly. Just escorting our friend home. He nodded toward Stallone. The officer's flashlight landed. on Stallone's face, and his professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Oh, Mr. Stallone, I didn't realize. Everything okay here, sir?" "Everything's fine, officer," Stallone assured him. "These gentlemen were kind enough to show me a scenic route back to the city." The officer looked uncertain, glancing between Stallone and the bikers. "I see. Well, just so you know, we've had reports of some motorcycle clubs causing trouble in this area recently. Routine stop." "No trouble here," Duke said. "Just heading home." The officer nodded, clearly trying to reconcile the famous actor with the group of bikers. "All right then. Drive safely." He looked at Stallone again. "Big fan, by the way. The new movie looks great." "Thanks," Stallone replied with a smile. "Appreciate the support." As the officer returned to his cruiser, Pete started laughing quietly. "Did you see his face? Priceless." "Certainly confused him," Ray agreed. "Movie star and motorcycle gang. Not what he was expecting to find." They continued their journey, finally reaching the outskirts of Los Angeles proper. The streets grew more familiar to Stallone as they approached his neighborhood. When they turned onto his street, he felt an odd mixture of relief and regret. Pulling into his driveway, Stallone parked and got out, stretching after the long drive. The steel horses lined up at the curb, engines idling. "Well," Duke said, removing his helmet. "Mission accomplished. Got you home safe and sound." "I can't thank you enough," Stallone said sincerely. "This wasn't how I expected my day to go, but I'm glad it did." "Same here," Bear said with a grin. "Wait till I tell my kids who I had dinner with tonight." Stallone laughed. "Listen, I've got an idea. The film I'm working on now, there's a motorcycle scene coming up next week. We could use some authentic riders as extras. Interested?" The bikers looked at each other in surprise. "Seriously?" Pete asked, his excitement evident. "Real Hollywood movie?" "Real Hollywood movie," Stallone confirmed. "It's not glamorous work, lots of waiting around, but it might be interesting to see from the inside." "Count us in," Duke said without hesitation. "Though I never thought I'd see the day when steel horses went Hollywood." "Life's full of surprises," Stallone replied. "I'll have my assistant call you with the details." He handed Duke his personal card with a number scrawled on the back. "Call tomorrow and we'll set it up." As they said their goodbyes, Stallone felt genuinely grateful for the unexpected friendship. In a world where most interactions with strangers involved some agenda, the day's events had been refreshingly straightforward, from conflict to resolution to something approaching camaraderie. "One last thing," Stallone said as Duke prepared to leave. "If Vic and his road demons are interested, there might be room for them in that scene too." Duke's eyebrows shot up. "Now that would be something to see. I'll pass along the message, but no promises." "No pressure," Stallone assured him, "just an idea." The bikers departed with a chorus of revving engines, the sound echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Stallone watched until their taillights disappeared around the corner, then headed inside. His home felt unusually empty after the companionship of the day. Checking his phone, he found several messages from his agent and director, but decided they could wait until morning. Instead, he pulled out his script and flipped to the motorcycle scene they'd be filming next week. Already, ideas were forming, ways to make it more authentic, more true to the spirit of the men he'd just met. Sometimes the best inspiration came from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, Stallone reflected, a wrong turn into a roadside diner could lead to exactly the right destination. A week later, the film set buzzed with activity. Crew members rushed about adjusting lights, checking cameras, and finalizing the elaborate motorcycle stunt sequence. Stallone stood by the director, reviewing the planned shots one last time. "So these friends of yours?" the director asked, glancing at his watch. "They do understand call time means arriving before, not after." "They'll be here," Stallone assured him. "Probably just navigating security. Not every day a group of bikers tries to enter a Hollywood set." As if on cue, the assistant director's walkie-talkie crackled. "Sir, there's a group at the gate saying Mr. Stallone invited them. They're, quite a presence." The director sighed. Send them through. But if they damage anything, they won't, Stallone said confidently. Minutes later, the steel horses walked onto the set, looking both out of place and perfectly suited for the scene they'd be filming. Duke led the group, with Bear, Wolf, Ray, and Pete following close behind. They'd polished their bikes to mirror-like perfection, and even their leather vests seemed to have been cleaned for the occasion. "This is something else," Duke said as he approached, taking in the controlled chaos of the film set. "Always wondered what these looked like from the inside." Stallone greeted each of them with a handshake. "Glad you could make it. Let me introduce you to our director, Mike." The director nodded professionally, though Stallone could see he was assessing the bikers with a filmmaker's eye. "You guys actually look perfect for this scene. Real, not like the actors we usually dress up as bikers." "We aim for authenticity," Bear said with a straight face, causing Pete to suppress a laugh. "Let me show you where you'll be," Stallone said, leading them toward the set, a stretch of road that had been dressed to look like a desert highway, not unlike the one they'd traveled together the week before. As he explained the scene, Stallone noticed the bikers taking it all in with varying degrees of amazement and amusement. Pete was particularly fascinated, asking questions about the cameras and lighting that revealed his film school background. "So we just ride past the main character looking intimidating?" Ray clarified, referencing the storyboard Stallone had shown them. "That's it," Stallone confirmed. "Just be yourselves. Well, your slightly more menacing selves. I think we can manage that," Wolf said dryly. As the crew made final preparations, Stallone's assistant approached with a concerned expression. "There's another group at the gate," she said quietly. "More bikers? They're asking for you specifically." Stallone smiled. "Let them in." Duke raised an eyebrow. "You didn't." "I did," Stallone admitted. "Sent word through Snake after our encounter on the road. Wasn't sure they'd show up." Duke shook his head, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. "This ought to be interesting." When Vic and the road demons walked onto the set, the crew members instinctively moved aside, creating a path between the two biker groups. The tension was palpable as Vic approached, his face unreadable. "Stallone," he greeted with a nod. "Got your message." "Glad you could make it," Stallone replied, extending his hand. After a brief hesitation, Vic shook it. His eyes moved to Duke and the steel horses. "Didn't realize the competition would be here. Thought it might make the scene more authentic," Stallone explained. "Two rival groups, real tension." "Real tension," Vic repeated, looking Duke in the eye. "Yeah, we can provide that." For a moment, Stallone wondered if he'd made a mistake bringing these longtime rivals together in such a public setting. But then Snake stepped forward. "Hey, Bear," he said, addressing the steel horse mechanic. "Bike's running great since that filter change. Thanks again." Bear nodded. "Good to hear it." This small exchange seemed to diffuse some of the tension. The director, sensing an opportunity, jumped in. Perfect," he exclaimed. "This is exactly the dynamic we need. Look, the scene is simple. You two groups face off on the road. Our hero rides between you. Think you can handle that?" "We've had plenty of practice facing off," Vic said, but his tone lacked the edge it might have had a week earlier. As the bikers were positioned for the scene, Stallone took a moment to marvel at the strange turn of events. A chance encounter at a roadside diner had somehow led to this moment. Rival biker gangs setting aside their differences, at least temporarily, to appear in his film. The first take went smoothly, both groups playing their parts with natural ease. They didn't need to act intimidating, their genuine presence did the work for them. The director was thrilled, calling for another take with minor adjustments. During a break in filming, Stallone found himself standing with Duke and Vic, an unlikely trio sharing bottles of water in the shade. "Never thought I'd see the day," Duke commented, watching members of both clubs mingling near the craft services table. Road demons and steel horses gnawed at each other's throats. "Don't get used to it," Vic replied, though without real hostility. "This is just a temporary truce for Hollywood." "Still," Stallone said, "it's something." Vic studied him for a moment. "You know, when I first saw you in that diner, I thought, You were just another pampered actor. Figured you'd back down immediately, maybe call security or something. And now? Stallone asked. Now I think... Vic paused, choosing his words carefully. I think people are more complicated than the boxes we put them in. Even movie stars. Even bikers, Stallone countered with a smile. Maybe, Vic acknowledged. Though some stereotypes exist for a reason. As if to prove his point, Bear's booming laugh echoed across the set as he arm-wrestled one of the stuntmen, a crowd of crew members cheering them on. The day continued with more filming, the scene evolving as the director recognized the authentic dynamic between the groups. What had been written as a simple ride-by became something more nuanced, a tense standoff with history and unspoken rules. During the final take, Stallone watched from behind the monitors, appreciating how the camera captured the genuine presence of these men. No amount of casting or costume design could have created what they brought naturally to the screen. That's a wrap for the bikers, the director finally called. Great work, everyone. That was perfect. As the crew began resetting for the next scene, Stallone approached the bikers. Thanks for doing this. It's going to make the film better. When does it come out? Pete asked eagerly. Will we be in the credits? Spring next year, Stallone replied. And yes, you'll all be credited. I'll make sure you get invited to the premiere too. The thought of these rough and tumble bikers walking the red carpet made him smile. Hollywood was always looking for authenticity while keeping real, life at arm's length. Today, real life had invaded the set, bringing with it something no script could create. As the bikers prepared to leave, Stallone noticed Duke and Vic talking quietly near their motorcycles. There was still a wariness between them, but also something new, a grudging respect, perhaps. Snake approached Stallone while the others were distracted. Hey, wanted to ask you something. Go ahead, Stallone encouraged. That stuff you said in the diner about getting knocked down and getting back up, was that real? Or just movie talk? Stallone considered the question. Both, I guess. The movies came from something real, and then the real part of my life got mixed up with the stories until sometimes even I'm not sure where one ends and the other begins. Snake nodded thoughtfully. Makes sense. He hesitated, then added, I was a fighter too, you know. Not professionally, but in the underground circuit. Got pretty good before I messed up my shoulder. Is that why you didn't throw a punch at the diner? Stallone asked. You recognized I knew how to handle myself? Snake grinned. Something like that. Plus, I figured if you could take all those hits in the ring in your movies, you might be able to take a real one. Some of those movie hits were pretty real, Stallone admitted with a laugh. Their conversation was interrupted by the revving of motorcycles. The other bikers were ready to go, both clubs mounting their bikes in an unconscious mirror of each other's movements. This was something else, Duke said, extending his hand to Stallone. Thanks for including us. Any time, Stallone replied, shaking his hand firmly. I mean that. Vic approached next, his expression less guarded than it had been at their first meeting. Not bad for a day's work. Got paid to look tough and didn't have to actually fight anyone. The essence of acting, Stallone joked. Yeah, well, don't expect me to make a career of it, Vic replied. Then, more seriously, that stuff you showed us, the martial arts moves during the break. That was impressive. You really do know your stuff. Years of practice, Stallone said modestly. When the bikers had shown interest in his training, he demonstrated a few basic karate techniques between takes. Their respect had been evident, particularly when he'd broken a board Bear had found among the set construction materials. Well, if you ever want to ride with some real bikers again instead of these steel horse wannabes, Vic said with a glance at Duke, you know how to find us. I appreciate the offer, Stallone said diplomatically. With final handshakes all around, the bikers departed, the sound of their engines gradually fading as they rode off the studio lot. Steel horses in one direction, road demons in another, yet somehow less divided than they had been before. The assistant director approached as Stallone watched them leave. We're ready for your scene, Mr. Stallone. Coming, he replied, turning back to the controlled reality of the film set. As he Walked to his mark, Stallone found himself thinking about the strange journey that had begun at Pete's Pit Stop Diner. A simple stop for coffee had led to an unexpected confrontation, which had somehow transformed into friendship and a valuable lesson, one he'd known but had perhaps forgotten in the bubble of Hollywood. Real life, with all its complications and contradictions, made for the best stories, and sometimes the most meaningful connections came from the most unlikely beginnings. Later that day, when filming wrapped, Stallone received a text from Duke. "Road Demons actually invited us for beers. Miracles do happen. Thanks for today." Stallone smiled as he typed his reply. Sometimes it takes an outsider to help rivals see what they have in common. Enjoy those beers. You've earned them. As he put his phone away and headed to his trailer, Stallone couldn't help but think that this unexpected adventure might find its way into a future script. After all, the best stories weren't created in Hollywood writers' rooms. They happened in roadside diners, on desert highways, and in the brief moments when people set aside their differences to see each other as they truly were. And sometimes, those stories were even better than the ones he played on screen.